Hello and welcome to Rogue Artisans and Crafters, winner of the 2018 Southern Oregon Television Awards for Best Arts and Culture Show. I'm your host, David Glamour Dave Nienow. We welcome you, our viewer, to our show where we feature local artists and craftspeople here in Southern Oregon. With our show, we talk to our featured artists about how they came to their art, what drives them as artists, find out stories behind their art process, and how their work as artists influences their lives. Today, we are privileged to feature local artist Pam Haunschild. Pam is a nature and wildlife artist, but she produces her work in watercolor and acrylics and creates a unique look by taking a unique process to the creation of her art. Her work borders on the edge of being abstract, but still creating images that are recognizable, and the created art is also very colorful in appearance. I find her created work very beautiful, and I'm pleased to have her appear on the show. And so today we will talk to Pam Haunschild about her life as an artist and the work that she pursues today with her art. And so we welcome Pam to our show. So welcome to the show, Pam.
Thank you, David. I'm very glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you here because you produce some really wonderful, unique work that I find really exciting. So to begin with, how long have you been working as a professional artist?
Professional. Well, I've been creating and selling my art for about 5 years now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what were you doing before that, before you went the art path?
I was a college professor.
Okay.
Social science. It's a field called organizational behavior. So
okay. I
started my career at Stanford, and then I went to Texas, Austin, and then I retired in 2011.
Okay. And so, that was, like about 20-year plus career doing that, apparently?
Yeah.
And were you doing any art in your life during that time?
Not really. I when I was younger, I could draw. I was pretty good at drawing and illustration, and I actually had a scholarship to go to art school, but I decided to get a PhD instead.
Right,
Do this. And, so I didn't really have the time or it takes a certain kind of energy, I think, to create art that is a little bit incompatible with being a college professor.
Right.
And so, no, I really picked it up in retirement, and I took a lot of classes, a lot of workshops, and I have a lot of really good mentors and things like that.
So when you went down, where did you retire at? You were like in Texas?
Texas, Austin, yeah.
Okay. And then at what point after you retired, is that when you moved up here to Oregon?
Yeah, although we had our place here as a vacation home for quite a while. And actually, when I was at Stanford, we would come up like every other weekend and spend the weekend up here. And then it was a little harder to get to from Texas, but we still would spend holidays and things.
Right. So then, basically, once you settled here in Southern Oregon, is when you started to pursue the art.
Yes.
And
it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do, actually.
Yeah, well, there's such a wide variety of areas of art to pursue, right? So, and every artist, I think, in their life has to do a lot of experimenting to find the thing that really kind of grabs them, right?
Yeah.
And drives them to do what they finally settle on.
Yeah.
So, beyond the watercolor, because basically you're doing watercolor and acrylics is what I understand, right?
Yeah.
And have you done other media beyond those?
Well, I started out as a printmaker, actually,
okay.
But not for that long, maybe about a year. And then I switched over to, I did a little bit of bookmaking before that, making like handmade books, some of the printmaking. And then I actually spent about a year doing encaustics, working in hot wax.
Yeah.
And that was kind of fun, but the hot wax is actually pretty toxic. And so I decided it probably wasn't, I don't have super great ventilation, and I didn't want to put a big system into my house and all that, so I decided to move away from that. And then I kind of started with acrylics, and I didn't think I would like watercolor. And but I had a teacher who encouraged me to take a watercolor class, and boy, I just fell in love with it.
Yeah.
And so now I actually kind of mix the two. We call it water media, and a lot of watercolor societies and watercolor people who work in watercolor will mix both watercolor and acrylics now.
Okay. And there's, because I find that watercolor as a media seems to be something that people either really fall in love with or they just can't stand,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I've done watercolor in the past in my art life, but it just was something that was more of a frustration for me than So, but the people such as you and other artists that I've met who do extremely well in watercolor, I'm just extremely impressed that they're able to take to it as well as they do, and to have the patience with it, because I have no patience really for anything. So, so that always impresses me.
Yeah.
Now, you have a kind of a bit of a unique process in creating part of your wildlife and nature images. And basically, from what I understand, is that you actually take some natural materials and lay them onto your canvas and do things with that to get some of the impressions that you generate.
I do.
So talk about how that works.
I have a couple different ways to do it. So in some cases, I will actually I like ferns and grasses and leaves and things like that. And I also use some sand, things from the soil and things like that. And I will lay it on the paper, or sometimes I use a special surface called clayboard. That's really nice for getting really nice, really bright textured effects. So sometimes I'll lay the plants down and then wash the watercolor over the plants and then let it dry and then pick them up, and it leaves an impression.
Okay.
And then sometimes I will actually take the plants and actually put them into the paint and encase them in acrylic medium so that they're archival, and but the plants are actually there in the paint.
Which I find really kind of cool, because in effect you're really in a way creating more of a dimensional piece in the art.
Right.
And in a way kind of preserving a little bit of that nature actually in the art itself.
Yes.
Yeah, which I find really kind of cool.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the you said clayboard, right?
Clayboard, it's
right.
called.
And we have a piece of that here. So this is an example of the clayboard material that you use, and I find it's extremely smooth.
It is.
And it's one of the smoothest surfaces I've ever seen for art. And I've dealt with various forms of canvas and stuff. So, do you have like any problems with your acrylics and watercolors adhering on that really well, or is
no? It's actually fairly absorbent, but at the same time, it's also slick. So so it's really nice if you want. Like with my style, I like things to run and be loose and drippy, if you will.
Right.
And it's very good for that. It's very hard if you want to get a really, really precise, like take a paintbrush and get a really precise line. It's very difficult to do with that on clayboard. But a couple other advantages to it. So for watercolor artists, maybe you remember this from your watercolor days, you it's not like you can just add white paint if you want white.
Yeah, right.
So you have to think ahead, and save your whites and all that kind of stuff. Well, with clayboard, you can actually, even after your paint is dry, you can actually wipe it off, paint off, both acrylics and watercolor. And so you can get back to your whites pretty easily. Or you can scratch into it with like a scratching tool and get white lines and things like that. And that's really nice. But probably the biggest advantage to me in terms of presentation, because unlike regular watercolor on paper, with clayboard you can just varnish your watercolor and then you don't have to frame it under glass, so you don't have that barrier between the painting and the viewer.
Right. Okay.
So
yeah, that's kind of a cool aspect actually.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of sizing on I assume that your clayboard material is available in all standard sizes that an artist would expect to find?
Yeah, although I don't think they get super big. So I've worked on 20 by 24. There might be something larger than that, but it wouldn't be a whole lot larger.
Right, okay.
So if you're one of the artists who works on
really big stuff, Okay. Now, we have some examples of your work here on set. And so we want to talk about these pieces that you brought. We'll also have like a slideshow of some additional pieces that we'll talk about after we talk about these pieces. But to begin with, the piece that's right behind me, let's talk about this one first. So this is, let's talk, tell me about this piece to begin with.
Okay. The title is Pollination 1. I actually did a show last year at Art and Soul Gallery, which is where I have my work. Right. And it was on pollinators. And with my art, one of the things I like to do is I'm very concerned about nature and the environment and animals and wildlife. And so what I'm hoping is that when people look at my art, that they will get even more of an appreciation for the beauty of nature and maybe a desire to preserve that. So one of the things that I like to do is kind of call attention sometimes to, not in the painting itself, but like in an exhibit,
right,
to, like for example, with pollinators, I was calling attention to the fact that pollinators are in decline and in danger. And so this is one of the pieces that I created for that. So it's a hummingbird. Hummingbirds are pollinators. I also did some bee paintings and butterfly paintings and things like that for that exhibit. Okay. And this is more or less a standard watercolor. It's done with standard watercolor paints on watercolor paper, framed behind glass. And it just shows a pollinator feeding on a clematis flower.
All right. And then the next image we have right behind here, talk about this one. This is...
Yeah, that's one of the pieces on clapboard. And so I got some ferns and some grasses and leaves. Everything that you see there as that is an image in that piece is an actual natural material that I collected. A lot of them I collect off my property. I live up in the woods. And so it's an example of the process I was describing earlier, where I lay them down, I wash the watercolors over. I use a few other texturing materials in there. There's some salts that in the sky that are creating that texture that's in the sky, and there are some stones and things like that. And then I wait for the paint to dry, and then I pull the materials off, and it actually makes a really nice outline around the piece, the fern or the piece of grass. Although sometimes grasses, because they're round, they don't print as well as some of the flatter leaves do. And so that's where I can do the thing I was talking about with clapboard, where I'll go back and scratch some of the grass stems out and things like that, which is really, really nice to be able to do that. Not something you can do very well on paper.
In terms of the what's the length of time in that drying process when you're creating that? Is it
the drying? Yeah. It dries about the same as paper, actually.
Okay.
It's not. I mean, I'm using a lot of paint and very wet paint, but I would say it's dry in 45 minutes.
Oh wow. Okay, so it's kind of it's
maybe.
not an overly long process.
No.
Okay. And then this next piece here. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So that. Actually, I created that piece when I was artist in residence at Lassen National Park, and I wanted to do a night sky painting. This is a giclée print onto canvas, but the original was actually done on clapboard, just like the others. And it's only a slightly different process in that what I do in the night sky paintings is I first lay down onto the clapboard all of those bright undercolors, so the pinks and the greens and the yellows. Put those down, and then I cover the whole thing with a layer of blue, dark blue. And then I can do the thing I was talking about. I actually then will take paper towels or Q-tips or a rag or whatever and start wiping off to get back to the white around the edges, so that we can actually see those trees once I paint those in. So that's the last thing I do. I go in and paint those trees. Okay. And then, well, the stars. Yeah. Yeah, white paint on a toothbrush.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So. Yeah. And then the last piece behind you, let's talk about that one.
Yeah, so that's an example of the one where I actually incorporated the materials, these are ferns, into the paint itself down at the bottom. And the background is watercolor. The trees are done in acrylic. And I also, the other thing I did, I wanted this to be a painting about a place, which is my mountain, Mount Ashland, actually. And so in addition to the ferns from Mount Ashland, I also used some of the soil, the decomposed granite, mixed in with the white acrylic paint when I was painting the trees.
Right.
So they've got a sandy texture to them.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's a really cool process. I mean, the fact that your art is at a certain level actually incorporating the actual art of what Mother Nature produces itself into the physicality of what you're creating. I think that's kind of a neat thing.
Yeah, thank you.
And so now we've got actually some additional images that the control room can also bring up, and we'll talk about some of those as well.
Okay.
Okay, so if the control room can bring those up. Okay, so we have a falcon here. This is one of my favorite pieces. I love that.
Great. Yeah. Traditional watercolor on paper.
All right, and let's go on to the next. That's the piece right behind you.
Yeah.
Okay, and so we've talked about that. So let's go on to the next.
Yeah, this is octopus. I call this octopus garden.
Yeah.
And it's a watercolor background, and then I used white acrylic, to paint the octopus. Well, he was all white originally, and then I added some watercolors on top just to make some forms.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's go on to the next.
That's another.
So this is one of the pollinator images, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Another version of a hummingbird feeding on a trumpet vine.
Okay. Yeah, let's go on to the next.
This is another pollinator piece. That's a bee up there in the upper right-hand corner.
All right. Yeah, let's go on to the next.
This
and
piece.
That's the piece right behind me, right? Yeah. So okay. And then let's go on to the next.
Yeah, I call this impermanence. It's I did 2 or 3 of these. They're just transparent birds against a kind of a bright watercolor sky.
Yeah. And
just trying to get the impermanence of life with the mostly permanence of the mountain.
Right. Yeah. Well, when I saw that, the first impression is kind of like a ghostly kind of a feel. Yeah. Right, like there's the ghostly spirits of these birds, in the sky, and I just thought that was really appealing.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go on to the next image. And that's like another in that series.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. I guess this is a different one. Yes, second one.
Yeah, and then what about this one here? This is
actually a landscape that I did in Costa Rica, and I was thinking of donating it to a place that I was staying there, and then I changed my mind, and so because I liked it a lot, and so I put the geese in. There are no geese in Costa Rica, I don't think.
Yeah.
And
okay, yeah. Let's go on to the next. And then that's the image behind you there.
The title of that is In My Sleeping Bag.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, okay. Let's go on to the next.
This is in the redwoods, kind of a similar view, looking up into the sky. And actually, I was at Redwoods National Park sketching out the angles of the trees. Right. Okay. And that's also done on clayboard. You can see the washy background.
Okay. Yeah, let's go on to the next.
Snowy owl.
Yeah.
I did this when I was at Glacier National Park as artist in residence there. Okay.
And let's go on to the next.
Tide pool. I've done several tide pools. Again, on clayboard, kind of a mixed combination of techniques, but you can see the washiness and the pattern there is stones that I put down and washed the paint over and then picked them up.
Right, okay. Let's go on to the next.
Another tide pool. Just on regular paper, though.
Okay, all right. And let's go on to the next.
Quantum entanglement, I call this.
Yeah, okay.
I love ravens, and I just wanted to say something about being entangled.
Yeah, right, okay.
Being attracted.
Yeah. And I believe there's one more.
Yeah, this is a red fox. I call this snow melt. I was trying to get kind of the idea of, early spring when the streams are running up in the mountains and the trees don't really have any leaves yet, and there's a fox in there.
Yeah, so. Okay. And is there one more? Yeah, I think there is.
Yeah, nesting, nest in the bushes again, early spring.
Okay. Well, there's this one here too. Now, this was, you called this watercolor owl.
This is what the owl sees.
What the owl sees, right?
Yeah.
And so I found that kind of interesting. That that there's this wide dispersal view of a scene.
There's actually a little mouse in there. He's very hard to see. I didn't want him to stand out too much, so he's hiding in there. But he's there.
Okay, well, I'm sure the owl will get that here soon enough. So, so now part of your work has you going to different national parks, right? Because the national park has like an artist in residence program that artists apply to, basically. So talk about that process.
Yeah, they don't all have them, but there's many that do. I think there's like 50 national parks, and yes, they run these, bring artists in for these artist in residence stints, and you apply, and it can be kind of competitive. Some are more competitive than others, but it's just a wonderful opportunity if you like nature and like doing any kind of painting, with natural subjects. The national park gives you housing. It usually lasts for a month. You go there for a month, and they give you housing. Sometimes they give you a small stipend. And in exchange, what they want from you is to either donate a painting to the park or to interact with guests in some way. So give a talk or lead a workshop or a demonstration, or sometimes some combination of that.
Yeah, it's something that I know they do that at Crater Lake here locally.
Yes.
I've actually had looked at doing that myself as a photographer in the past, but at the time, I was caring for my father full time, so it was just absolutely impossible to really get away for the time.
Yeah.
If I were awarded that opportunity, I just could never actually get away.
Yeah.
But it's something that I've often thought myself. With Crater Lake being so local to us.
Yeah.
So I think it's great that that as a local artist you're availing yourself of that opportunity. And I think that based on when I looked into it a while back, it seemed to be like one of those really great but under promoted government programs. That I felt like a lot of artists should avail themselves of, because. Our national parks are one of the greatest resources our country has.
And it isn't just national parks, some national monuments. So like Siskiyou, our Siskiyou National Monument,
right?
They just started one and had the first group come through last year.
Okay. So we're kind of coming close to the end of the show. Let's talk about the availability of your art. What kind of price range is your art? What kind of sizes are your art pieces done in? So what's the price range that people can expect to pay for wanting to get either an original piece or a print?
Yeah, I do both. So my originals, I tend to work in a couple different sizes, 11 by 14, which is what that piece is, not terribly big. And those are, they're framed and ready to hang and everything, and I usually charge $275 for those. And then I have some bigger pieces, as you can see, the 16 by 20s or 20 by 24s, and those are in the 400, maybe even low 500 range.
And so those are for like your originals.
Yes.
Okay. And then what's the pricing on your prints for like in the similar size range?
Yeah, about $75 for fine giclée print of, not on canvas, but on paper, of an 11 by 14 and about $125 for a 16 by 20, larger.
And then when I looked at your website, that you've got, you also have like cards that you also
greeting
offer.
Cards, blank greeting cards,
And so if people want to order a piece, they just go to your website, and your website is?
PamHaunschild.com.
Right. And you also have any other social media? You got like a Facebook page?
I do.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I mean that's kind of the stuff we want to kind of let people know.
Okay.
And
I also have my art at Art and Soul Gallery here in town.
Right.
So.
And then I understand you do classes too, right? You also offer classes on occasion.
I do.
Okay. And what's like the price range on your classes?
That varies a lot. I'm teaching a 2-day workshop at Sitka Center for Art and Ecology, which is up in Lincoln City, and I think for a 2-day workshop, it's like $165.
Okay. All right.
But that's all materials included.
Yeah. Okay.
And we're planing on clapboard.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Well, Pam, I appreciate you coming on to the show.
Thank you, Dave.
It's been great to talk about your work and your life. And so I want to thank you for coming on, and I wish you luck on all your other future work.
Thank you.
Okay. So we've reached the end of our show, Rogue Artisans and Crafters, and we thank you at home for joining us and learning about our featured artist, Pam Haunschild. We wish to thank Pam for agreeing to come on to the show to discuss her life as an artist and her work. I encourage you, the viewer, to visit Pam's official site at pamhaunschild.com, along with her official social media page on Facebook. Be sure to also make a trip to explore her work in person by visiting Art and Soul Gallery, where her work is featured when you are in Ashland. We also want to thank our crew who have made it possible to put this program together, and to thank RVTV for their wonderful studio facility, which allows us to produce shows such as this one. If you'd like to become a studio producer and create your own public access show, you can contact RVTV to learn how. You can watch the show on Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. and Thursday evenings at 11:30 p.m. on Channel 15 of the Ashland Home Network, and in the rest of Southern Oregon via Charter Cable on Channel 182. Episodes of Rogue Artisans and Crafters can also be found at archive.org. You can also visit RVTV online at rvtv.sou.edu to find live streaming of all RVTV shows. You can also follow our show on Facebook by visiting and liking our official show page. Just search for Rogue Artisans and Crafters. I'm your host, David Glamour Dave Nienow, and we will see you next time.